Hi, and welcome back to ITC568. Today we're going to look at some guidance for assignment 4. Okay, assignment 4 is an interesting one, privacy and data protection, the strategic approach you're going to recommend to use. It's worth 25%, due the 4th of October, 4,000 words, plus or minus 10%. Okay, our scenario, as we know, DR Alarms is expanding. The basic scenario here hasn't changed much. They're manufacturing in Vietnam, in Hanoi. They're shipping from Hanoi to different offices in Australia, New Zealand, Singapore. They're negotiating with a company in Germany to be their agent, and that's probably going to get underway shortly. They're also still considering the end user monitoring for its alarm systems. Final decision has not yet been made, but it's getting close to that decision. However, the MD has been told that he should develop a strategy now to provide for protection of data and, prevention of privacy loss across the company. And that should include the different storage sites in AWS as well as their on-premise data center. He's been told about possible benefits that might come from the use of a zero trust security model, but he's somewhat skeptical about the practicality of actually using this particular zero trust model in the DR Alarms environment. So, as consultants, you're brought in again to now write a report that compares and discusses the layered defense and the zero trust security models. Now, the layered defense is the basis on which DR Alarms is currently working at the moment. So you have 4 tasks. Firstly, to analyse and discuss the differences between a layered defence and a zero trust strategy for DR Alarms, and you need to look at the benefits and issues that they would face with the implementation of either strategy. Secondly, how would the implementation of either of these strategies affect the threats and risks to data protection for their data? Which would be the more effective strategy to contain the identified risks? Which strategy would allow more effective controls? Third question is how the implementation of either of these strategies, again remember it's either, going to affect the threats and risks to privacy loss for the DR Alarms data. So which strategy would be the best or the most effective in preventing privacy loss? You'll need to look at both the benefits and issues for both strategies in prevention of privacy loss, and then decide which strategy would better meet DR Alarms' international privacy requirements. Finally, you'll need to look at would either of these strategies provide DR Alarms with a better data sovereignty strategy and approach. So they're the 4 questions that you've got to look at. So again, a report format, with 4 different headings: difference between layered defense and zero trust, strategy effects on data protection, strategy effects on privacy loss prevention, strategy effects on data sovereignty. So a 4,000 word limit plus or minus 10%, and referenced using the APA 7th edition style. Now, there is some essential reading to do in this, and these 3 fairly recent articles all talk about cloud security complexity from Baron Hyde and Mahmood and Yeo, 2019 one. Quite an interesting one from the Cloud Security Alliance, definitely well worth reading and keeping. Ahmed Naher, Urmi and Tar have put out a very interesting article on protection of sensitive data in the zero trust model. So that's worth downloading and reading from the ACM. And then finally, there is an article by Cunningham, Holmes, Pollard and Thea on the 8 business and security benefits of using the zero trust model. So again, I would recommend you read those prior to starting the assignment. Okay, so the approaches I would recommend. Now in question 1, you really started, at this stage now, this assignment starts to really get you into the heart of the subject. You've got to analyse 2 quite different approaches to security: layered defence and zero trust. And your analysis will then determine the security posture for DR Alarms into the future. So you need to analyse each different approach and determine what are the differences between them as it affects DR Alarms, the benefits that each approach would bring to DR Alarms, the issues that each approach would bring to DR Alarms, and then finally which approach is the best one. So some hints for this particular question: make sure you read the essential readings before you attempt this question. It's kind of critical. Secondly, don't assume that zero trust is the right answer just because you're asked to compare it. Okay, That's not necessarily the case. So you have to make up your own mind here. Make up your own mind which is the best approach, but base it on facts, analysis, and logical thinking. Okay, and ensure that you discuss the benefits and issues of both approaches, not just one. Right? You need to do it for both. Question 2, you then need to look at those two approaches and see how it's going to affect data protection for DR alarms. So you may want to outline here what you consider the real necessary requirements for data protection for DR alarms first. Then you can look at each approach and how its implementation will affect those requirements that you've outlined, and consider how that implementation may perhaps occur, right? But I'd be very brief around that. I wouldn't get too tied down with it. You need to discuss how each approach will affect the threats and the risks you identified in assignment 2, and which will be the best to use and why. So what you'll find here is both assignment 2 and 3 will really come to the party here, because it'll give you a lot of stuff that you can use. Also remember, if you're quoting from your assignments, don't forget to reference them, because they are things that you have now published, so you need to be able to reference it so we can refer back to it. And then of course, which approach will allow the more effective controls and why. The big hint here is don't get too tied down with the implementation details. I know a lot of us are techies, I used to be one, right? But keep this high level. Remember, management's not all that interested in the technical details, right? They just want to see how's it going to get done, how's it going to affect things, and they don't care what you've got to do to put it all together. So keep it pretty high level. Question 3, we're now doing the same thing, but now we're looking at the privacy side. So again, you might want to outline what you consider are the requirements for data privacy for DR alarms first. That might be, if you think that's a good way to approach it, it's certainly the way I would approach it, but your way may be different, and we all do things in a different manner. So consider each approach and how its implementation is going to affect data privacy. And again, you might want to briefly consider how that implementation could occur, but again, don't get too tied up in the implementation details. Discuss how each approach will affect the privacy threats and risks you identified in assignment 2. Which approach is now more effective for preventing privacy loss? Why? Explain it. Just don't make the bald statement. Tell us why. What are the benefits and issues of both approaches, and which will best meet DR alarms international requirements? And again, why? You need to explain why. And as I said before, if you're talking about implementation details, keep it high level. Management aren't that interested in the technical details. Question 4, consider which of these strategies would give you a better data sovereignty approach, a data sovereignty strategy. So again, some hints here. Look at the data sovereignty issues you identified in A3. Analyse each approach to determine which approach is best suited for maintaining data sovereignty and why. Discuss the analysis and show how each approach can assist. And then finally, which approach is recommended and why you're recommending it. Okay, the general hints, again, make sure you go over the case study information first. There are still bits and pieces in there which come into play as you get further through it. But again, that's all the hint I'll give you there. Again, I would recommend read the marking criteria to see what we're looking for in each question, because that will give you ideas about the approach that you may want to take. Keep your notes and keep adding to them. It's so much easier to compare all the different requirements, processes, etc., when you've got those organised set of notes. Again, I'd recommend keep the word count in mind, but don't get too hung up on it. I'm really looking for clarity and brevity in the report, but not at the expense of logical thinking and expression. Don't forget your references, right? It is absolutely important. And as I said, if you are quoting from your previous assignments, don't forget to reference yourself. So that also needs to be done. So finally, as we said earlier, DR alarms now is expanding. But that brings its own set of problems. And what we're trying to do here is give you a real good, interesting example of a real world problem. We've now, as I said, reached into the heart of this subject. This is where we've been heading, to get into a real strategic problem that has considerable privacy and security issues. Now, as you can see, these have got to be quite carefully considered so that you can make good decisions, particularly in a cloud ecosystem. It's the sort of problem that will probably be given to you in your workplace. It certainly was for me. Good luck, and I hope you enjoy it.